About 3 months ago, I built a couple of those multi-purpose containers. I even uploaded a video about it. I really liked the design, so I thought maybe it's time to bump it up a notch and bring this design to the next level. Alright, so I previously got my hands on some oak that came from a local church. Huge thanks at this point to Gary Dean, who hooked me up to this material. Those are mostly the end pieces of the pews that had to be removed during a big renovation project, and I'm super grateful to get the chance to give this material a new life. Now, judging by the appearance, by the hardness, and from what I got told, I was very confident that this is oak. The big question is now, is it red oak or white oak? Now, I don't have the experience to tell them apart by the appearance only, but there's one test you can do to help you identify the species. If you look at this comparison of the end grain, you can see that the sample on the left seems to be very open and porous, while the other appears very dense. Now, that is because in white oak the pores are plugged with tylose, which makes it very rot resistant, since water can't travel through the pores anymore. This is why white oak is being used, for example, for whiskey barrels and in shipbuilding. Red oak, on the other hand, is so open and porous that you actually can take a piece and blow bubbles, like I did here with a sample of my material. The most reliable test would be to place a couple drops of a 5% sodium nitrite solution on the wood. If it turns dark, well, then you would have white oak. That test is 100% accurate. I just couldn't source any sodium nitrite, so the bubble test will have to do. It's not crazy important in my case anyways, but I thought it would be nice to know what kind of species I'm working with. And red oak it is. Now that this is out of the way, let's start with the actual build. What I'm working on here is a jig to help me glue up the framework for the round sides, and I chose a 3/4 inch piece of scrap plywood. I drilled a whole bunch of 1.5 inch holes with the Forstner bit, and those will help me to clamp down 7 strips, which I cut on a table saw. So that wrapped up the framework for the cabinet, and for the next step I needed around 80 12-inch long strips, which involved a lot of work on the table saw, then the planer, then the table saw again, then the miter saw with a saw stub to cut them to the right length, and eventually I used a router to round over the edges with a 3/8 of an inch round over bit. After removing pretty much an entire roll worth of masking tape, I was left with this. As you can see here, some of the strips did not perfectly line up with the front and back panel. And because we are dealing with hardwood and end grain, this would take forever to sand down, so I found the best way to deal with this is a handheld router with a flush cut bit. Because I glued a flat surface to a round one, I had those small gaps on the edge of the strips, which didn't look very good, so I used simply some sanding dust mixed with wood glue to fill those areas. And after sanding everything with 80 grit, this was pretty much invisible. Alright, so I just glued up a couple strips on the inside here to act as a base for the drawer slides. And for once I chose something very simple for that. I just cut a slot in here with the table saw to accept another strip of wood. And the two of them together will create a very simple wooden drawer slide. So that's what I'm going to use here. The drawers are pretty much done. Next on the list are the small doors on the left and right. I cut myself a whole bunch of those little diamond-shaped pieces and I wrapped them in aluminum tape. That will keep any glue from sticking to it. Then I took a pile of oak strips and marked my angles with the help of this simple jig here. I found the disc sander worked faster and safer than the Mitre saw for all of those small pieces. Yet again I used masking tape for the glue up. I chose on purpose an angle so that if I glue 6 of those frames together, they would form sort of a half circle. This was surprisingly stable considering how fragile it looks, so if it can withstand to fall apart on a belt sander, then I'm more than happy here. I had to give the screws of the piano hinges more to hang on though, so I glued a thicker piece of oak to my ornamental piece, which stiffened it up even further. I just attached them with 2 screws for now, but later on I used more, and it is worth mentioning at this point how valuable a right angle attachment for your drill can be. Not only for the screws, but also for pre-drilling with a hex shank drill bit. That would have been pretty much impossible without it. For the actual door I'm using a scrap piece of plexiglass, which came from an old storm window. It does have a couple small scratches, but visually they will disappear since the ornamental framework will catch your attention, so I'm not really worried about that. I used a Dremel tool with a spiral cutting bit to cut out my shape, and I refined it with a disc sander. I had to tape the small metal table though to avoid any further scratches. It only took 2 screws to keep the plexiglass securely in place. I had to come up with some kind of catch though to prevent the door from tilting inwards. For that I used yet again another piece of oak and I drilled a hole in it to accept a neodymium magnet. Notice how the glue just squirts out at the end grain here. That's another great example of how open the pores are in red oak. I drilled 2 holes in the catch as well to accept 2 small finishing nails, and they will reinforce the glue joint. Now that this is in place, I can mark the perfect position for where my tiny handle has to be. That is important because instead of installing a second magnet or a metal plate to latch onto the catch magnet, I just used the mounting screw of the handle. And with tiny, I mean really tiny. This handle is meant to be used with just a finger, which is why I needed this pocket. It just gives me something to hang on to. This is looking already really good. We are almost done. In the next step I will have to take everything apart again and sand it with 120 grit, maybe even 220. I will spare you all of that because it's really boring to watch. And then I can move on to the finishing process. I decided to use tung oil as a finish and I was very happy about how easy this was to apply. I gave it a generous coat with a brush, which really helped to get in between the strips, and then I wiped off any excess oil before I went for a second coat after 24 hours. I really like how it brings out the natural look of the wood and how it gives it a warm feel. However, I have to say it has a little bit of an aggravating smell to it. I guess only time will tell if this is going to fade. To give the cabinet a higher quality feel and look, I used black self-adhesive felt fabric to cover the inside of the drawers as well as the inside of the storage space on the left and right. On purpose I left about a 1/16 of an inch gap between the Baltic birch plywood and the oak frame. That is just enough space to install a silver trim strip. Now usually you would use this to upgrade the look of your dashboard or the doors in your car, but I found it works great to give your furniture a unique and high-end look as long as you plan for it. Last but not least, I added 4 8-inch long metal furniture legs. I ordered them on Amazon and they ended up costing me $25 Canadian, so there really was no point in trying to fabricate them myself. Thank you for making it so far through the video. This project was a ton of work and I really appreciate your support. I actually built 2 of those units since they were meant to be nightstands for our bedroom. My wife got really tired to stare at the milk crate that she was using until now. It was too small anyways and I didn't even have anything, so I just scattered my stuff on the floor, which of course looked horrible, so something had to be done. Anyways, we're at the end of the video. Thanks again for watching and now let me show you a couple nice shots.